That piece was entitled Purple and Brown. The composer and the performer is Michael Robinson. And Michael, that was certainly very unique composition there with the computer and the synthesizer. And it sounds like it's, I guess one of the advantages to playing with a computer is that it sounds like 3 or 4 people are playing sometimes, and in fact it's only one person. How many textures can you get at one time? How many counterpoints, let's say?
Well, this particular system I'm using now can produce 6 simultaneous pitched voices. One of them is essentially a bass-type timbre, and the other 5 have a type of keyboard sound somewhere between a piano, harpsichord, and an organ. This system can also produce 7 simultaneous percussion sounds, and that's a lot to work with. I mean, there
Really?
are other systems which have 10 times as many voices to work with, but I found that by staying with this system, which certainly has some limitations in terms of timbral variety and the amount of voices that you can use, I've found that by staying with it, I was able to discover things which I think I may have missed if I moved on to other equipment before exploring it more fully.
I'm going to talk to you more later in the program about the equipment and that sort of thing. I just want to interject that we sort of had a little technical problem here. There was some Latin music playing all of a sudden in the background, which was kind of a unique thing that happened, but it wasn't really intended, and that was just because of something that was happening here on the board, which I don't think I plugged anything up, but magical things happen here in this particular console. I don't remember pushing that button, but anyway. Well, actually, we don't push buttons here. Mostly we turn pots up. But at any rate, let's backtrack a little bit because I want to just get familiar with you and have the audience get familiar with you just as far as your background and how you became attracted to music. I mean, what was your first musical, I don't know, what should we call it, just love, or what attracted you to music to begin with as, I assume, a child?
Let's say that's a long time ago. Yeah, I guess my mother played piano, and she had a very fine sound on the piano, actually, though she stopped playing, I guess, after she got married and had children. And I think my father used to play classical music a lot, and so I started...
Also piano?
No, he played violin, actually, though when I say played classical music, I meant he would play, records on the radio like that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And so I started taking piano lessons, and I played trumpet for a while. And then in high school, I started playing the saxophone, and my primary involvement with music for about, I guess about 5 years was playing the saxophone and focusing on improvising with the saxophone. And gradually I discovered that I was happier with the results, and also I felt that my main abilities were better focused by actually writing down the music and composing it, and everything I do now is fully notated. I found that I enjoyed having the time to think things out and be able to put them down, as opposed to improvising, which is wonderful too, but it's a different type of musical experience, really.
Boundaries. So you were a saxophonist, and primarily you were interested in jazz during high school and playing in like jazz bands and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I played in jazz bands, and then I got into, I wouldn't call it jazz so much as just some sort of improvisation, I guess. I would...
like jam sessions with other musicians?
I became involved with playing with percussion primarily. It would just be saxophone and 1 or 2 percussionists.
And then you went to school at Crane School of Music, which is in Potsdam, and there you studied composition. I mean, when as an undergraduate, you decided to go...
Right, I went there as a saxophone major, and I switched to composition after 2 years, though I continued playing saxophone through the years that I majored in composition.
Okay, because you've really studied with some interesting people throughout the past almost 10 years, I guess.
Right.
Quite a few really quite remarkable people. If you've not studied with them, you've taken seminar and composition classes and that sort
Right.
of thing.
Right.
So you really opened yourself up to a lot of different types of music and composers and composers that I assume whose music you were attracted to, or at least whose minds you were interested in some way. I mean, the list is quite remarkable. Well, Alvin Lucier is an interesting composer that a lot of people have been influenced by, and he was you've been was he a composition teacher of
Oh
yours,
no,
or you were?
actually, Potsdam, they had a lot of very creative composers come visit and give concerts, and he was there, and um, I performed one of his pieces on saxophone. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I did it very well at the time, but I was involved with performing one of his pieces. I don't recall the exact. I think it was. I don't recall the exact title right now.
Mm-hmm.
It was Kindrel Orchestrations. It had to do with affecting the flame, a flame coming from a Bunsen burner with pitch. And
Okay.
yeah,
Hmm. Okay, but you've also studied improvisation and saxophone with Paul Jeffrey, Lee Konitz, and Ken McIntyre. So that's quite an impressive list. And Phil Woods.
right.
Do you perform on saxophone still today?
No, I haven't really played in about 5 years. Um, it's funny, but sometimes I have the urge to play, and I find that by not playing, I'm kind of forced to give more in my composing,
Hmm.
and I kind of really enjoy that. So it's it sounds a little silly, but actually
Hmm.
by
Oh.
staying away from the saxophone, which sometimes is kind of like you know, a temptation, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
um, I actually end up being happier expressing my music through the composing,
Hmm.
and I think it makes it stronger, actually.
How does the saxophone influence your composition, or does it?
Well, I think it was really important to learn to play an instrument because, especially in the area of computer music, when you play, you get a sense of how music breathes, and I think that's really important.
Okay, well we're talking. I'm talking to Michael Robinson, who is my guest here today on Here and Now. And this is WBAI, by the way, if you just tuned in, 99.5 FM. You're listening to a program called Here and Now, which is primarily devoted to contemporary sounds of various kinds. And today I asked Michael Robinson to come down to the studio and to more or less give me a lesson, along with you perhaps, in the world of computer music, which is I'm familiar with computers only through the way that I use computers, which is probably the way a lot of people use computers, which is word processing. And I own a computer. I just bought a new, beautiful computer about 2 weeks ago. And computers, if you really get involved with them, people become very attached to them. They're sort of the computer lovers, and then there are people who are just totally intimidated by computers, I think. But I think once you get sort of hooked on computers and you get past the intimidation stage in which you don't know how to make it do what you want to do, and it seems to have a mind of its own, and it can be very frustrating. That's from the point of view that I come from. Now, this isn't from but once you get past that point, I think people can really get hooked on them, and they become like adult toys, or they just become, a source of money, or all the things that computers can be. And it's just a whole new thing which didn't exist, certainly not in my childhood. But today's kids are growing up in such a different world, and computers are certainly a part of that world. And computers, I think, are certainly here today, and they're here in many aspects of our lives, and telecommunications, and all these things that computers can do. But as far as music is concerned, did you ever feel intimidated by when you were trying to put your computer together, because you really assembled this musical instrument from different sources? You said, we were talking earlier, one
Right.
part is from the United States, two parts are from Japan.
Well, um,
But I mean, did you ever go through a phase in which you were just confused, or like I said,
well,
intimidated?
I really never had any attraction to computers or even electronic music. I didn't enjoy it when I had to take it in school. At first, anyway, I didn't really enjoy it, and I got involved with the computers as kind of an experiment, and it they were fairly difficult to learn at first. It used to take me a long time to transfer the composition into the data that the computer could decipher and then transform into sound. And I've gotten a lot quicker with it now, so at this point I almost feel like the computer is invisible. It's almost not even there,
Hmm.
and the music goes almost directly from my mind and body into the sound which comes out. So by spending that much time with it, it's really just an extension of my mind, I guess.
Hmm. That's interesting. Now, I have a picture of you here, a couple of pictures of you here performing on, or this was exactly what it would look like when you perform, what I'm looking at. Is that correct?
Right.
This particular setup.
Yeah.
What's really unique about it, I'm looking at it from the back side, which has all the plugs and the cords and the cables and the ribbon and all this sort of thing connecting everything together. What's kind of unique about this computer synthesizer, as you call it, is that it has no keyboard. And a lot of people who either write computer music or only write synthesized music who use computers for other, for memory things and putting things into memory and then being able to sync things properly, also use computers. But this is a computer and a synthesizer, as you call it, computer synthesizer, and it has absolutely no keyboard. So when you're performing it, you're doing a live performance, and you have this equipment in front of you, and you say all of your music is notated. Which buttons do you push? I mean, how do you make the music come out? I was listening to this last piece, Purple and Brown, and I was trying to imagine how on earth, how,
I see. Well, actually,
because it sounds like it's being performed on a keyboard.
right.
And then you go into some kind of a rhythmic, a multi kind of swooping rhythm that is not so up and downish, and I just wondered, how is that possible?
At the
How do
time
you
of
control
performance, the computer actually does most of the playing, almost all of it. I have to program the computer to play each specific piece, and I have to adjust all the various levels so that I have the proper balance for that particular piece.
So
But
does the computer play it back?
yeah,
Is it on a floppy disk, a
it's
hard
stored
disk?
on a floppy disk, and the computer actually reads the floppy disk in real time.
Hmm.
So it's actually reading the data,
Mhm.
and it's playing at the same time.
So this is a different type of computer that one would use for word processing, and it has different sort of capabilities to it?
I actually use an Apple II computer, which can be used for almost anything, and there's a special part which you can insert into the back of the computer, which transforms the musical data which the computer reads in terms of numbers into sound. So, but it's an Apple II computer, actually.
Well, this is really fascinating because you mentioned the fact that all of your music is notated, and it's not notated on manuscript paper.
Oh, yes, it is.
Oh, it is
Yeah,
notated
yeah,
on
it's-
manuscript paper.
Yes, it is.
And then you convert that. I see.
Right,
Then you
exactly.
convert that to numbers, so it's a digital
Right.
type
I start off,
transformation.
by composing the music, like sitting at a desk. I compose in my head without.
Traditional way.
Right.
Yeah.
And everything is fully notated. And then when I finish, I enter it into the computer via a software language which reads notes in terms of numbers. And then the modules are attached to the computer, and they convert those numbers into the sounds which I originally imagined in my head.
It's not
So
modules, it's modules.
Modules, right, modules.
Hmm. Well, that's pretty fantastic. So, and you mentioned the fact that this language of conversion used to take you, I would assume, hours.
Yeah, it used to be very tedious
convert it.
because I would have to translate the notes into numbers, columns and columns of numbers, into a notebook, which took a tremendous amount of time. And then from the numbers, I would then enter the numbers into the computer. But after some experience, now I know instantly what note equals what number, no matter what it is. So it's probably 50 times faster than when I first started.
Well, just for the listening audience, I've seen this done before, and it is a very tedious process because you have to tell the computer, in terms of like one note, there's many different things to tell it: the duration, the exact pitch that you want, the timbre that you want,
The tempo.
the tempo. So there's
The
not just one,
articulation,
the
the articulation.
articulation, and all of those things have to be numerically explained to the computer for each and every
Right.
note.
I'm fortunate to have found a software program which is really very well designed, and I just feel fortunate that I found that
Hmm.
at this time.
Hmm. But your music is very melodic. A lot of computer music has been criticized for being somewhat um, abstract and not personal. But yours does not sound
Right.
like that.
I don't think, there's any limitation as to how any type of music can sound.
Mm-hmm.
And because maybe computers were associated with a certain type of sound at
Mm-hmm.
one time, that doesn't mean that they're always going to be that way. I think anything you can imagine is possible, just about. So,
Hmm. Well, I still have some questions on that subject to ask you, but let's listen to the next piece that you've written. It's called Gift.
right.
And I like the names of your pieces, by the way, because the next piece after that is Trembling Flowers. So this is Gift. Tell us something about Gift.
Well, I actually got the idea for Gift. I was listening to a piece by Brian Eno entitled Thursday Afternoon, which is actually one of the finest pieces which I've heard in a long time. It's a long extended piece on compact disc. And while I was listening to that, I got the idea for this piece, and when I was thinking of a title, I said, well, it seems like a gift from Brian Eno because he gave me this idea, so I called it that.
Well, why don't we listen to this, and then we'll come
Okay.
back and talk to you some more. And I'm talking to Michael Robinson, who is the composer and performer. That work was Gift, again by Michael Robinson, performed by him and also written by him. And that gift was because of the influence of a piece that he heard by Brian Eno, who is a very significant composer. Has he been an influence on other compositions that you've written, Michael?
Not really. I mean, it was really just kind of a coincidence. I just happened to um, hear this piece of music, and um, it gave me an idea. And I really haven't listened to a great deal of his music, but this piece in particular I think is very beautiful.
Hmm.
Thursday Afternoon
Thursday Afternoon is
is
the
the
name of
title of
his
the piece.
piece.
Yeah.
I'm looking at some things that you wrote about yourself to give to me to sort of get more acquainted with you. And you say that your style has been nurtured by a number of different influences by German, Austrian, North Indian, African, jazz, and rock music. Of course, not all of these are in your own background. So were these are just interests that you developed in college, outside of college, here in New York City? I mean, how did all these different various influences, how did you, of all the things that are out there that are
Well, I guess
available?
I've always had a curiosity to hear different things, and I'm attracted by certain qualities, and if I hear those qualities, it really isn't important to me what country the music came from or what time period it came from, and I just kind of seek it and
And these
explore it in
particular,
different ways.
these particular influences were you were drawn to them because of exactly. Can you just sort of elaborate on that? Like what do all these have in common to you as a composer? Jazz, rock, North Indian, as opposed to South Indian or
Well, I guess
Balinese
when
and
I
African and
try to
German or
articulate what it is about music that I like, I think I've come down to three elements. I think I might describe them as freshness, balance, and substance.
Hmm.
And if I find those three elements coexisting together, that's usually music that I really enjoy a lot. And so I would say that that's perhaps the underlying thing in common, which different styles of music that I'm attracted to have. For
Hmm.
instance, Bach and Charlie Parker,
Hmm.
I think, have a great deal in common.
You
And
mentioned. Oh, I'm sorry.
oh, sure.
I, I,
Go ahead. Yeah.
well, actually, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to really kind of elaborate because I know you used the word nature and in your some of the titles that you give your pieces, or all of your pieces, have titles that are not abstract titles. They're, we heard Purple and Brown, we heard Gift, Trembling Flowers is coming up. There's a piece called Night of Fire. And nature is something that is important to you in music. I mean, how does nature has had an effect on a lot of composers. In fact, a lot of composers go outside of New York City to MacDowell Colony and all these places where there is nature, Tanglewood, Berkshire, where you've
Hmm.
also been, I understand. How does nature
Well,
affect your music? Or
it's a curious thing, but I found that there's something about the expressive nature of using these computers which seems to have something of, and a quote, I think it's from John Gunther, the benign indifference of the universe. There's something very non-human about it, but it's alive in a way that nature is alive. So it's not human, but it's alive, and I think there's a kind of unity there.
okay, you've had a lot of influences in your music, as we were talking about earlier, and you did study in at Tanglewood at the Berkshire Music Center. This was in '78 and '79. Were you in college at that
No,
time?
I had finished undergraduate, and it was kind of between when I went to graduate school.
Well, there were a number
Um,
of people there that summer. It looks like that were quite remarkable people. If these were all the people that were there that I have in front of me, Leonard Altman, Leonard Bernstein, John Chowning, Jacob Druckmann, Gunther Schuller, Ralph Shapey, and Paul Zukowski. And did you have connection with all of them? I mean, what is the Berkshire Center like for a composer? I know what it's like for a performer.
well, I was actually part of a seminar on analyzing music there, and so my primary teacher was Leonard Altman, who's a musicologist and arts administrator, and I sat in on classes with conducting classes by Leonard Bernstein and composition classes by about 10 different composers, and I was able to go to rehearsals, which was really informative. I had never enjoyed Wagner before, and um, it was one Saturday morning I kind of reluctantly went up to a rehearsal, and they started playing the Siegfried Idyll on like a beautiful Saturday morning, and it was, oh no, I'm sorry, it was the overture to Tannhäuser,
Hmm.
and it was just so beautiful that
And
I
it went
developed
together with nature.
yeah, yeah, it kind of fit in.
Huh. That's kind of interesting because like Wolf Trap and Tanglewood and all these places that nature and music blend, there is something really special about sitting out on a lawn with a picnic with the stars on a warm, July or August evening and listening to music. It somehow enhances it. It doesn't distract from it like some things distract from music, whereas I think nature sort of enhances it quite often.
Yeah, I think that's true. Unless there are too many mosquitoes out, which can be a
That
problem.
can be true also. Okay, so you also studied, or you had did some graduate study at the California Institute of the Arts, or CAL as it's called, California Institute of the Arts. That has some pretty remarkable people there also, Mel Powell, Leonard Stein, and Martin Sabatnik. Did you find that all three of those were dynamic people that influenced you in any way?
Yeah, I think all of them had their own points of view, and they were felt very strongly about the way they approached music, and it was interesting to be exposed to the various viewpoints.
So is that? I mean, I see like you've probably maybe that's your attitude because you say that you're in a sense you say you're self-taught, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. What you mean by that? Sort of brushed on it earlier, but so when you go to a seminar, when you take classes, what does a composer look for? You have these people whose music you've heard. Um, their viewpoint? Is that what you're after? Is it after? I mean, what do you bring from there? I mean, what, for instance, when you went to California Institute of the Arts, did you come out of there with different ideas, a slightly different philosophy? I mean, what exactly? How did that affect you? And when I go to a seminar or something, there's something that I go to all these different sessions. There's something that someone says about something that somehow touches
Well,
me.
it's
Or
a funny thing because I think there's a danger for musicians in perhaps getting too wrapped up in a narrow world and just thinking about music as if it was separate from the rest of life. And when I think of California, I actually think more of the climate there and the different feeling being close to the Pacific Ocean, and people seem to be friendlier there, I guess, due to the climate, I guess. And so that's probably perhaps the biggest influence of going to school there, just living in Southern California for a while. And I actually enjoyed meeting a lot of the other students there, and that was kind of very meaningful for me.
And at this time, this was in the fall of 1980, were you already writing music for the computer?
No, I got into that, I think 1984. I started doing that.
So this is
on my own.
fairly recent.
Yeah, and I actually started composing for it in 1985. So I've actually finished over 50 pieces for the synthesizers in about 3.5 years.
That's
that
really
I've
remarkable.
been writing for them.
So you really were just turned on by the computer once you got it plugged in?
Yeah, I really enjoyed not having to be dependent upon other people to realize my ideas in sound. It's kind of like a horrible nightmare to be writing things, and it's happened to a lot of people. To be writing things, and then you're dependent upon the
arts
luck or whatever.
organizations and
Yeah,
the
but it's horrible. It
management.
really is. So I really enjoyed. It
That's
seemed
interesting.
pure insanity not to be self-sufficient and to be able to do everything myself, and not have to be caught up in this nightmare of waiting for someone else to do something that you want to have done.
Do you still write for other
I
mediums
haven't.
besides
No,
the
I
computer?
haven't at all, because I found that there's so much to kind of explore in this area that there isn't really time. There isn't time enough to do writing for these instruments, and
Well, 50 compositions.
perhaps I will
is
sometime in the
quite
future, but
remarkable.
right now, no.
So exactly like how did you learn about the computer? I mean, what was the first time that you saw the computer? You heard a piece by computer? I mean, how did you get on the track with the
a
computer?
friend of mine used to cut out articles for me in a magazine, and he gave me one day, and it just sounded very interesting, and I liked the idea
An
of
article
being
on computers?
right, on computer synthesizers. It was a very expensive one, which I couldn't afford, but I was able to
Your
research
friend
it.
thought that this would be good for you? I mean, because
I
you
don't-
were
it's
frustrated
funny.
in some ways, or?
I think he just thought it was a novelty, perhaps, that I'd be interested in. I don't really know. I never really asked him exactly. I haven't seen him in a long time, so.
Sounds like a good friend.
Yeah, it's the jazz bass player Reggie Johnson, actually.
Wow.
And
So he just somehow, well, musicians sort of have a sixth sense, some people think,
yeah, maybe.
So he sort of guided you in a sense toward
And
computers.
then also I was talking to Joan LaBarbera about computers, and I was interested in getting involved, and I asked her for some advice, and she arranged for me to meet Charles Dodge at Brooklyn College, and he was kind enough to give me a brief demonstration about the concepts involved, and he didn't offer any specific, equipment to get, but he just gave me kind of an overview. And then I went out and found something which I thought would be something I could work with, and I've been with it now for 3.5 years.
Well, I know people who work with synthesizers, and there are just so many synthesizers out there that it's kind of a field trip for several months, maybe to every day or several times a week to go out and try different kinds of synthesizers on, so to speak, to see which one is going to be best suited,
Right.
because there are
I
still
think
analogs.
it's almost a
digital.
trap that some people get caught in. They're a victim of consumerism, in a sense, that the companies advertise their latest and greatest synthesizer like every other week,
Mm-hmm.
and people feel like they're missing something unless they go out and buy it. But I found that it's more meaningful to stay with one system and kind of explore that as deeply as you can before you
Mm-hmm.
move on to something else.
But you had to do a certain amount of research to come up with the exact system that you have, because you
Right,
mentioned
I
that.
did a tremendous amount. I looked at dozens of different products, and
And you mentioned that one component was used to be made in the United States. I mean, it was never made anywhere else, and it's not made anymore because it wasn't. I mean,
yeah,
why?
apparently the idea of translating music in terms of numbers was not appealing to very many people here in the U.S. and the product, which is made by Roland in Japan, um, was discontinued here, and I actually had to get 2 of the 3 modules that I use from Canada. Those other 2 modules were never sold.
They were just
in the
imported
US.
from Japan to Canada.
Right, right,
And you knew from Japan to Canada.
right, right.
And you knew. How did you know about them? I mean, from your research, but
I
if
think
they weren't here.
yeah, part of my research was calling up people who worked for Roland, and it was just kind of a slip. One guy let out, "Oh, by the way, there are 2 other modules which enhance the one that you have."
Hmm.
And he said, "I don't think you can get them though; they're not sold in this country."
Hmm.
But he said you can try Roland, Vancouver, British Columbia. So I called them up, and I was able to have them send me a couple.
So you really did go through quite an extensive route to come up with the exact equipment that you have.
Yeah, I guess so. Looking back, I did. I've gotten used to them now, so. But
Well-
I guess I did go through a lot of work to get them.
Well, I'm looking at this picture here again with the computer. Is this a monitor here that is also involved? It looks there's only like something right here on the side. Do you need a monitor?
Yeah, that's the monitor where you can actually see the data that you're entering. And during performance, I take it off the body of the computer just so, for visual.
Do you perform it by looking at the screen on the computer?
Yeah, I have to look at the screen to know precisely what I'm doing. Actually, yeah. It's an
Is all of that
important
data like we were talking about? There's a number for the timbre, a number for this. You look at all that as you're performing. It seems like it would be very complicated.
well, I look. Most of the preparation is done before the performance, so at the time that the piece is performed, I can actually just look at an overview of all the various elements and.
And this is on the memory for the most part. Now, what do you do? I mean, this is stored on a floppy disk, so during performance, it's played back. Now, why would you even have to be behind the computer other than just to turn it on?
Well, after I set all the different controls and levels and specify what has to be done in that piece, I can actually leave the computer. And though some pieces I like to make certain adjustments while the piece is playing, but most of them I can actually leave and enter the audience if I like, which is kind of nice.
I bet. So this really isn't, in a sense, it is live music, but it's a different concept of live music.
Yeah, it is. It's being done. It's not being performed entirely by a person. It's the machine is actually processing the information.
And it certainly it would sound totally different, like we were listening here, in the studio, and the reel-to-reels that you've brought in, and it sounds different than it would, say, live. I mean, you wouldn't want to just set up a tape recorder on stage with 2 speakers and have a good recording.
Right. These timbres seem to be very sensitive to any wow and flutter, or just the tape medium in general, and there's a certain depth to the sound and richness to the sound which you hear live through. I have my own sound equipment which I use for concerts, which are carefully selected, and it's really the best situation to hear them in a live performance.
What's the best kind of performance space for your music?
Well, I haven't really. The largest place I performed in was St. Peter's Church, which has very high ceilings. I haven't really been in a large concert hall, but galleries and small churches seem to be a good place right now.
Where the acoustics are fairly live?
Yeah, I like the acoustics to be fairly live, but they can also be dry too. It's just different, really.
Hmm.
I actually, it takes on a different quality when it's in a dry room.
Hmm.
Um, I guess I haven't come to any final decision on what, is
Hmm.
the perfect.
Hmm. I just wondered, like sometimes certain ambiances of the room can really like certain things just kind of
I
pop
think
out
yeah,
and.
I prefer a room which has a pretty wet sound to it,
Hmm.
and which has a good bass resonance, and which is fairly live, so it's kind of a liquid type sound.
I think most electronics in general sound better in those kinds of
Yeah,
spaces
yeah,
for some.
that's true.
Maybe most music does. Well, you mentioned St. Peter's Church, and it brought to mind that you do have a series of concerts coming up there later. Well, today's the 31st of April, so tomorrow's. Wait, no, what is
Of
today?
March,
Of March,
31st,
I mean.
right? I think, yeah.
So we're about ready to get into April here. But so April the 16th on a Saturday, you're giving at noon, at 16th, 23rd, and 30th at 12 noon on Saturdays. That's an interesting time for a concert series. This is going to be at St. Peter's Church at the music room. There's a music room in St. Peter's Church.
Yeah, it's a space, very nice space on the lower level, which holds 100 people, and which
Mm-hmm.
has fine acoustics. And there'll be three concerts, three consecutive Saturdays on the 16th, 23rd, and 30th. So it's for a long time I've had the idea that I'd like to be able to present programs on a weekly basis somewhere in the city. So this is as close as I've gotten to that so far, to have three consecutive weeks, because I have a lot of material and I'm always writing new pieces, and it's nice to know that you can just have them played on a regular basis.
Okay, well, I have several more questions that I want to ask along this topic. But let's play some music that you've entitled Trembling Flowers. Is this contrast to the other two pieces that we've heard, which were very
Yeah,
much in contrast with each other?
it's quite a contrast. It's an extremely exuberant type piece. I think of Trembling Flowers as being kind of like a joyful type piece. Some people hear it as violence, but
Hmm.
I guess that's one point of view.
Why the title Trembling Flowers if there is
Well, I actually
any kind
lifted that from a poem by William Butler Yeats. I think it was The Two Trees. And he was using trembling flowers in that poem to describe human joy.
Uh-huh.
And it seemed appropriate for this piece.
Okay, well, let's listen. This is sort of a shorter piece.
Yeah, it's about 4 minutes long.
Okay, again, this is music by Michael Robinson, and this is computer music, computer synthesizer. That was quite different than the other two pieces.
A little bit busier.
Yeah, really busy. And what sort of came, a lot of things came to mind. I'm just trying to sort of envision in my own mind how you still go about writing music. And, you know, in case someone just tuned in, I'm talking to Michael Robinson, and he's the performer and also the composer. And you're listening to computer synthesizer. What really is intriguing to me is you mentioned the fact that all of your music is you create it away from the computer. You mentally, conceive it, which is the way composers conceive it. But some sit at the piano and try out different, ideas and stuff. But you sit and you notate it. Now this piece seems to me like it would take, not forget the converting it to the numbers for the computer to interpret, but just for you to sit down with manuscript paper, just that it was so busy and that it was so complex. This is how you
took a long time to write that.
took a long time to write. Uh-huh.
It actually, there are actually only three voices in that piece. It sounds like more perhaps, but there are only three voices. And technically speaking, I combined the three Ionian modes, starting on C, D, and E.
Huh.
And that produces some of the friction which you hear in the piece. And then at the intervals where the percussion enters, actually those intervals are supposed to be the loudest, but I think sometimes on the radio they're compressed and they actually bring that down. So
Mhm.
it might be flip-flopped in a sense, but at the points where the percussion enters, the voices are doubled. So there are actually 6 voices playing 3 parts at those points.
So you notated it, and then you went to the computer and converted it for the computer to understand. Now here it is notated. Now, did you have percussion sounds in mind as you notated it?
Oh, sure, yeah.
You have these timbres in mind, the computer timbres that when you write a piece, do you have those timbres in
Well,
mind?
yeah, the more you work with the instrument, you become familiar with the different sounds it can produce, and then you try to imagine, well, how can I incorporate these sounds into the piece? And I mentioned before I have the choice of 7 different percussion timbres that I can use, and there was one timbre, actually 2 of the 7 I didn't like at all, and I didn't see how I could possibly ever use them. And just recently, I was able to incorporate them into some pieces. I think that goes back to what I said about sticking with one system for a long period of time. You're able to discover things that you would not have discovered if you had left them sooner.
Okay, so then you write these pieces. So every time you write this piece, a new piece, and you're sitting away from the synthesizer, you're familiar with the sounds. So you have those sounds in mind. You know what settings, or do you
Right.
ever?
I'm sometimes tempted,
Yeah.
before a piece is finished, to enter it and to hear, exactly how it is at that point. But I've usually found that interferes with my sense of balance of the whole piece. It's usually better if I can just put off that temptation and just finish the piece without any type of outside interference, and then enter it after it's completely finished. And sometimes I'll make some changes, but usually it usually remains the way that I've written it out the first time.
And the computer is capable of doing many types of timbres. You mentioned that there was. I mean, is there an?
Oh, well, actually, this system is fairly limited in the way I use it in terms of timbral variety. There isn't one module which can produce all types of abstract electronic sounds, which people would normally associate with electronic music.
Mm-hmm.
And I can actually alter the timbres while a piece is being performed so that the piece would be unrecognizable. I mean, it has that capability. There are, about 50 different sliders and knobs and buttons, and I've experimented with that, but with very few exceptions, I haven't used them because I just don't feel the need to at this time. Perhaps sometime in the future I will.
And I know that you've mentioned the fact that percussion instruments are very influential in your music. And in fact, when you were a saxophonist in high school, you used to improvise with only yourself playing sax and a percussionist. So do any of your pieces, so far the ones that we've heard, have a very strong rhythmic pulse to them?
Right.
Do any of them ever get away from that? Do you ever go into more of a freer rhythmic structure?
It's funny you mention that because lately I've been writing these very long, like 1 to 3 hour pieces with a kind of a peaceful yet very intense quality to them. And the titles of those are, let's see, Yellow Silk is one. It's about an hour long, and Tropical Sun is about 3 hours long. And
Do we have those today?
I
Although
brought
we
I
may
brought
not be able to get to.
Tropical Sun with me.
Okay.
So that might be a good contrast later, perhaps. But those pieces don't really have any steady metric pulse to them. They're very liquid in that sense. With
Yeah, I would like to
perhaps some of the
maybe
influence of the alap section of ragas. There might be a slight influence there.
So in your own life, do you listen to many other kinds of music, either radio or your record collection?
Yeah,
or?
I like lots of music. I listen to everything, just about. I don't have time to listen to everything I would like to.
Uh-huh. Hmm. I was looking at your bio that you gave me. You're sort of unusual in a number of ways. Like most people don't list their the jobs that they do, which are of a mundane nature, and I'm not going to go into them. But I know on my resume, I just try to highlight all the things that I feel of an interest. But it's interesting to me that that you're sort of bold enough because it's such a competitive field that especially here in New York for musicians that I think sometimes we there are a lot of musicians who become quite pretentious about and making money other than through the arts is something that is somewhat shameful,
I see.
but it's but I find your what you gave me as sort of a bio kind of interesting, but it's very interesting as far as your musical aspects because you've had a number of people whom you have studied with. You also mentioned the fact that you did some informal study with John Cage and Steve Reich, and why did you choose those two composers?
Well,
I mean, did you just call up John
oh
Cage
no,
and
well,
say, I would?
I really enjoyed reading John Cage's some of his early books and hearing some of his pieces because I think there's a danger when you start studying music in school to be forced into a very narrow chamber of what is possible in music. And he, John Cage, I think, as far as I know, was one of the first people to speak up and say that, really anything is possible as long as, it's done in a way that you really believe in it and you work hard at it. And I was kind of just curious to meet him, so I wrote him a letter, and he invited me to his loft and spent an afternoon with me talking about music, looking at some of my scores. This was quite a while ago, about 5 years ago. It was really very, very nice.
Mm-hmm. And
Very
what
friendly.
kinds of things would he say? I mean, you have your scores with you, and I mean, what does an older composer tell a younger composer? I mean, was he excited about your music? Was he critical? Was he what kind of attitude did he take?
He made some very practical comments about notation, about better ways to notate certain things, and the music I was writing at the time was very different from what he was doing, and so I don't think he could time was very different from what he was doing, and so I don't think he could relate so much with what I was doing, but he made some comments as to contrasts between melodic jumps and scale type melodic movement.
In criticism of what you had done, or in
No, just as something he felt that I might want to explore.
The contrast
large
between those two.
Right, large intervals more, the space between large intervals more.
So that would. So did you take that advice? I mean, that
No, it's
something
funny
that you
because no matter what anyone says to me, it doesn't seem to matter. I seem to
have your own
almost
path.
have things. I go my whichever way I'm going to go. It seems to almost be determined. I almost feel when I do it like I was going to do it anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But it's interesting to hear other opinions.
What about Steve Reich? What kinds of comments
I guess
did he make?
a common friend put us in touch, and we actually exchanged about 4 letters or postcards. And he again had some very practical advice about recording certain things. And again, I don't think he could relate very much to what I was doing at the time, but he was encouraging,
was this your
very
computer
friendly.
music back then? Let's see.
No, actually,
this wasn't
no,
your computer
I wasn't
music.
involved
phase.
with computers at the time that I contacted both of them.
So this was music written for acoustic instruments.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it was.
And something that came to mind too, since your music is notated, and even though it's notated for the computer synthesizer, and you have those timbres in mind, is it possible for acoustic groups or instruments to be to come along and say, or musicians to come along and say, can we play this on acoustic instruments? Would that be offensive, or would that
A lot of
enhance
it I
or
think would
take
be
away from it?
impossible to play because of
Huh.
the range of the voices. Like,
Aha, I
I
see.
think I have a 9.5 octave range, which I'll frequently employ for one single voice. So,
Mm-hmm.
and rhythmically, a lot of the things would be pretty impossible to do. Well, I guess it's possible,
Mm-hmm.
but it might take away from the unique expressive, the kind of objective expressive quality that the computers have.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess some pieces it may be possible with, but I tend to doubt that it
Mm-hmm.
would work.
So that's not really something that you think about or have
No,
as an
not
objective or
really.
anything. Okay, we have a piece coming up called "Pictures on the Wall." Now, what is this piece about?
Well, I got the idea from the title for that. I was visiting the studio of the artist Gabriel Longhi, who takes photographs in black and white and then alters them with different shades of paint. And so I was surrounded by all these um, works of art, and for some reason, I think I got the idea for the bass line of this piece. I was jogging, I was running.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually in Hawaii at the time, and I was running up the sugarcane fields towards the mountains, and then
Mm.
coming back. And I think I got the idea for the bass line from that, and then some of the other ideas I got while I was in this studio.
Well, you did mention the fact that you wrote 50 pieces in the last, what, 2 years or
Three
three
over
years?
50 in the last 3 years. But quantity really isn't important to me. Quality is more important. It just so happens that
That
I was able to, I have a lot of ideas and I try to get them down as
well, that's
well
really
as I
was the point
can.
I was going to make. It seems that you have all these ideas. Do they just come to you, or do you need to sit down and I mean, are they already there? I mean, you seem to like indicate through some of the things that you said about, different people have made comments. John Cage made a comment about melodic writing or something. But it seems that your ideas are already there that you want to get out before perhaps you explore, another path or something. But you already have all this information inside of you. And in a sense, the computer has become the medium for expressing these rather than writing them for acoustic instruments, trying to get the musicians together, rehearsing, and then hearing them really for the first time. The computer is quite remarkable because you can just almost, once you write it and go through this process of converting it to the computer language, it seems like that is more it's a faster way of expressing your
Yeah,
ideas,
it's
and
almost
you can keep
instant. It's really
keep
nice
them.
to be able to, complete something, and then I've gotten so quick at entering the data that, in less than an hour, I can hear a performance of a piece which, may be an hour long itself, and
And what's that like?
it's done
Uh-huh.
perfectly. You don't have to worry about rehearsals
I mean, here you sit
and
down and you've written it out on manuscript paper. You have these ideas in your mind and these timbres. Then you go through this fairly elongated process. I mean, well, not any longer than most composers go through to, if you had to sit down and rehearse the musicians and whatever, that's very time consuming also. But so you sit down and you program it for the computer, and then you haven't heard it yet. So what do you do? Are you like all excited? Are you nervous? I mean, are you in a room by yourself?
well,
And I mean, what happens at
it's
that
funny.
point?
The more I work with it, I pretty much know it's the way it's going to sound.
Hmm.
There aren't
So there's
too
not.
many surprises.
So
There
is
are
it a
some.
certain excitement though
Oh
about
yeah,
hearing it live for the first
yeah,
time,
yeah. It's
bringing it to
yeah,
life, so to speak?
yeah. It is because you're working with all these different ideas, and if you're fortunate enough to have them, come together, the different aspects of music, if you can get them to work together, it does take on a life of its own, and that's very exciting, and it has a good feeling to it.
Hmm. Okay, well let's so Pictures on the Wall was written after you saw these particular paintings by, and what was the artist's name again? I'm sorry.
Gabriel Longhi.
Longhi. Okay. So this is really sort of came out of that experience of being in his studio or a gallery
Oh, it's
with
a
his.
woman actually.
Oh, it's a woman.
I
I'm
should say
sorry.
Gabrielle, I guess.
Okay, I'm sorry. Gabrielle. Okay, so Pictures on the Wall. This is a longer piece, about looks like 16 minutes, and
Yeah.
just a little suspicious. I hope I don't have it. I rewound it, which is what we decided we would do. So I hope it's not backwards or something, because the arrows are pointing the other way. But he's
Oh.
using the same kind of leader for. I'm not
Oh yeah,
sure.
it was tails out, right? And we rewound
I
it.
rewound it.
Yeah.
So hopefully, but if
Yeah,
it sounds a
hopefully we'll
little
hear it. I'll
funny,
know pretty
we'll stop
soon.
immediately. Okay, well let's listen to Pictures on the Wall, and hopefully it's heads out.
African mask from Cameroon, I believe, of a
I'm
female
sorry, from where was that?
from Cameroon in the Met Museum.
Oh,
Um, very strong mask, which has a numinous quality to it, that referring to an object being inhabited by some sort of spirit. This mask seemed to be alive in a way. And I was sitting there looking at it, and the woman's mouth was open as if she was calling or singing or something. And I just imagined this repeated note. I heard it, and that was the start of the piece. And Night of Fire is 35 minutes long, and it's divided into 3 parts, so I've
mm-hmm.
put about the first third, which is about 10 minutes, down. And after I wrote the piece, I was thinking of a title, and the opening percussion part seems to sound perhaps like flames. So as I actually wrote this piece in one evening, I stayed up very late doing it. I call it Night of Fire, because the mask seemed to have a story to tell. She seemed to be saying something. I've never figured out what it was,
Hmm.
but it seemed to be something fairly powerful, and Night of Fire just seemed like the appropriate title.
Night of Fire. That's a very image. Um, brings to mind lots of images. Night of Fire. And this is an excerpt from this much longer work. Now, when you're writing a piece, you mentioned that you wrote this at one sitting. I sort of
That's
sometimes see
unusual.
composers.
Actually, I don't think I maybe wrote every single part of it, but it was all mapped out, and quite a bit of the details were filled in at that time. Yeah.
Do you feel like when you have these thoughts in your mind, or a piece of music starts developing, do you sometimes I get these. I've seen composers write music and their hair is just all flying around, and there's these pictures of Beethoven. Everything is wild. Do you find that you're just sort of so involved in what you're doing that it's just absolutely necessary for you to sit down at that moment and write music and to try to get it out of you? Is that
Well, I have a strong, I guess I have might be described as a strong appetite for writing music. I think you can describe it as, like you have an appetite for food or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I have one for making music, writing music. So
Mm-hmm.
when I write, I like it to be very quiet, and I like to feel, relaxed and feel good, feel peaceful, so that there's no interference with the ideas that I'm putting down. Because I am translating the ideas in my mind onto paper with a pencil, and I want it to be, I want the flow to be, as uninterrupted as possible. I want to.
So you're more or less more in a meditative type of state, or
Yeah, meditative, in the sense of whatever quality that particular piece has that I'm attempting to get down on paper.
do you plan, like, for instance, if you have something to do and do within the day, say you have a job to do or something that might be somewhat mundane, do you know that, say, that evening you're going to have these hours to write music, and that you're going to set them aside as do you sort of plan that out? You do what you have to do, and then you come
I
back
guess,
and then really do what you
yeah.
have to do?
I like it to be very flexible. Find time to write every day, but it can be almost any time. It could be early in the morning, or it could be very late at night, or in the afternoon. There isn't one particular time
But
that
I
I
mean,
like.
just as far as you're setting yourself up to write,
Yeah,
say for instance, you have something to do for 3 or 4 hours in the morning,
right.
and you have these ideas in your head
Mm-hmm.
that you're anxious to get out. I mean, do you sort of say, okay, I'm going to do this, and then when you come home, you walk in and you know that you have this
Yeah,
time,
that
and
happens.
you
Sometimes I'll be like working perhaps, and I'll get an idea and I'll write it down, but I have to wait until I get to my studio before I can start actually filling in the details. But
Hmm.
it's usually enough just to get a general concept of the piece
Hmm.
and to have its broad areas defined, and then that's usually enough to um, sustain me until I can actually fill in all the details.
Hmm. Well, why don't we listen since we're in the last half hour here of Here and Now? Let's listen to this excerpt from The Night of Fire. Shall we, Michael?
Yes.
Michael Robinson.